and eat it too. Well, of course you can. If you have your cake, you can eat it. What you can't do is eat your cake and have it. It's completely backwards. What is it? Is it out of sight, out of mind, or is it absence makes the heart grow fonder? Which one is it? And if we say only the good die young, what does that say for all of you? So obviously that one makes no sense. None of them do. And there's another one that I dislike. And I hear this often. It's something to the effect of, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin. And I'm very worried about any time any one of us uses the word hate. It'd be worthwhile some Sunday to go through the scriptures and find out exactly how often God uses the word hate, which is very seldom. And God uses it in a very specific way. God hates when we conduct our religious affairs and there is no justice. That is when God uses the word hate. And is it for us to use a word to hate anything? Well, people like to say, well, I hate that sin. But what is sin? What is sin that we should hate? We began our worship with reading through the Ten Commandments. Just several weeks ago, we had Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the beginning of which, toward the beginning of which he said, "You have heard," and he quoted the Ten Commandments. And then he says, "But I tell you, you have heard, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look with lust upon somebody else, you've committed adultery. You have heard, do not kill, do not murder. But I tell you that if you call somebody else a fool, if you are angry with somebody, you are guilty of breaking this commandment." Jesus was saying to us, and as we read through those commandments, none of us can keep the law. None of us can obey the commandments of God. None of us can. And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? It means that we live without being able to keep the commands of God, by being sinful people, and we are sinful by our very natures. We had the story today in our lessons of the first garden, the Garden of Eden. The story of how sin came into our human existence. And whether the story some people consider to be exactly, historically, accurately true, exactly as written, and other people take it as a story which conveys to us a great truth. It doesn't matter. We still have the message which comes out of this lesson. The man and the woman which God had created were in the garden. Garden, a beautiful place. We still long to be like Adam and Eve in that garden. How often do we sing in the garden? We think about how Adam and Eve walked with God, and he walked with me, and he talked with me, and he told me I am his own. And the joy we shared as we tarried there, none other has ever known. But then comes the entrance of sin. God had asked of Adam and Eve, of the man and the woman, of all of us, to do anything we wish, but not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And of course, when you tell us not to do something, that's the thing that we exactly do. And so we did eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And as the scripture says, we then became like, we assumed that we were like God, knowing good and evil for ourselves. And that is sin. That is sin. Sin is not an act. If I walk into the store and I don't steal something off the shelves, if I don't shoplift, that doesn't mean I'm not guilty of never stealing. For we all have, in our own times, in our own ways, stolen things from others that we shouldn't have taken. May not be as dramatic as shoplifting, but in our own ways we all have. We have all not kept the commandments. But is the sin the act of doing something? No, it's not. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not bear false witness. We shall not lie. Yet is it a sin when the Nazis are at the door and you are hiding people in your basement? You are hiding Jews in your basement, and the Nazis say, "Are there any Jews here?" And you lie, and you say, "No, there are none." That's obviously not true witness. That's a false witness. But it's a false witness for a greater good. We become experts at parsing what is good and evil, what is right and wrong. I had a friend, we used to work together, he was senior pastor, I was the associate pastor in the congregation, who thought that children began to be mature when they began to know good and evil for themselves. I always said, no, that's the beginning of sin. That's our first sign of sin, knowing good and evil for ourselves. Because the original garden story, these people didn't live in their own knowledge of sin. They trusted what God thought was good and evil. They did not, Adam, Eve, these people in the garden, they did not decide what was good and evil for themselves. They lived in God's understanding of what was good and evil. And what we did by eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is to say for ourselves, we want to decide what is good. We want to decide what is evil. We will make judgments. We will make those judgments. We will do what God does. We will be like God. And we will judge others. And we will judge others. That's what that sin is. What the serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When we start assuming to ourselves the right to judge what is good, what is evil, what is right, what is wrong, what is sin, what isn't sin, we have then entered totally into rebellion against God and sinfulness. I just want to say parenthetically, by the way, that I've always resented when people blame the woman in this story. Certainly, as Paul makes clear in his exposition in the book of Romans, by one man came sin, death, and trespass. By another man, Jesus Christ, comes resurrection. We don't focus on the genders. We're all human beings. We have all done this. We all want to decide what is right or wrong for ourselves, and then to judge others by whatever standards we have. And we have no right to do that because we are not God. We are not God. And therefore, as we go through our lives making decisions for ourselves, trying to decide for ourselves what is right and wrong, we know how many times we have failed. We have made mistakes. We have stumbled. We have sinned against others. Sometimes when we thought we were doing the right thing, we found out later on that it was the wrong thing. Sometimes when we were trying to do a good thing, it turned out what we did was a wrong thing. That's happened to us all. We all carry regrets for things we have done, for things that we didn't do. But we also all carry with us the ability to judge others, that very human desire to judge others and to say that others do worse things than I do. Those are worse people over there than I am over here. I may commit little sins, but those people commit much bigger sins than I do. That's our sin. Judging. Why did Jesus say, "Judge not, lest you be judged"? Why did that beautiful time in the Garden of Eden end? Because people began to know good and evil for themselves, wanting to decide good and evil for themselves in the first place. They saw it, of course, they saw that each other were naked. They saw a lack in the other person. They felt embarrassment. They felt shame. None of that happens when we live totally in God's will. But when we want to be like God and to decide good and evil for ourselves, then we see the faults in others that God had never seen. When we want to decide good and evil for ourselves and be like God, we see the weaknesses in others that God never saw. In fact, if they found shame in being naked, they found being naked, being shame, and being the way God had made them. Our own deciding of what is right and wrong, good and evil for ourselves, and not living in God's knowledge means that we begin to turn against the very things that God has made and called good, including ourselves. When God created, Genesis 1, God created male and female. He created them and called them good. We become ungood in our desiring to know good and evil for ourselves. But we are still yet loved by God. We are still yet loved by God. God did not abandon us to our sin. God did not abandon us to our own judgmental natures, judging each other and doing all kinds of wrong things in this world, hating on others or hating on this or that or something else, where God has called us only to love. God did not abandon us. Jesus Christ came to us so that we would know that God loves us, that God gives us grace, that God gives us forgiveness. In our psalm this morning that we repeated at the conclusion of the reading of the Ten Commandments, was that line, I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, then you forgave me the guilt of my sin. And that passage reminded me of something we used to say in the Lutheran liturgy several books ago, worship books ago. It's not used anymore, but we would begin the service by saying, our help is in the name of the Lord, and the people would respond, singing, who made heaven and earth? And then the leader of worship would say, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. And then the congregation would respond in song, then thou forgavest me the iniquity of my sin. I miss beginning every service that way sometimes. We be reminded that when we confess, God forgives us. We may always live in our humanness of wanting to decide what's right or wrong for ourselves, judging others, judging ourselves. We may always be that way. We will always be that way in our humanness. But in our humanness, God came to us as a human being, Jesus Christ, to tell us that we were good, to tell us that we were worth it. Now, how do we then live in God's knowledge? Well, if I had to answer that question, I'd be the greatest theologian ever. I don't have that answer. But we can achieve it perhaps more closely, knowing that we will always fail. We're sinful. We're never going to keep it perfectly. Is to simply live in God, what God commanded us to do, which is to love. To love our neighbor, love our God, love everyone, to care and share, and to take care of everyone, to seek justice, to do the right things, to acknowledge the worth of every other human being like us, made in the image of God. When we take away the judgments, when we take away the criticisms, when we take away our putting people down for things that we don't like about them or something else, when we take that away, when we stop judging, when we stop deciding for ourselves what's good and evil, and seek to live only in God's knowledge, then we achieve at least stay a little bit more closer to that walking in the garden, where he walks with us and he talks with us and he tells us we are his own. That's the walk that we need to make in life. It's not walking sitting in judgment, but walking keeping our eyes solely on our God, letting our God tell us what we need to know